And we are live. So let's give people a few moments to come in and we'll see what happens. Otherwise, Gerald, I'll just ask you some questions. Whoops. I'm now hearing this twice on my screen. Whoops. I'm just going to turn down the volume on my other end. Cool. Excellent. So, all right. Okay, so Gerald, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for being here.
No worries. It's always a pleasure. So, in the absence of anyone's questions in this live stream, I'll just throw some random ones at you. Or, ask you some questions.
I'll throw some random ones at you.
Okay, all right, you want to flip it around?
Who's some artists that you like? Some new artists.
Oh, that's okay, cool. I didn't see that one coming. Okay, so one of my number one artists or my number one bands, Gerald, are Metallica. Metallica, which I think we've discussed before.
You're a metalhead?
Yeah, I am. Historically, I am. Like I was in a big way, like a good 8 years ago or something like that. It's always a part of my life, but I'm way more of a Metallica head than I am a metal head. I also like Maiden. I also like the old metal guys. Sabbath, Led Zeppelin.
Well, I wouldn't exactly call Led Zeppelin heavy metal.
At the time, some of them would have considered them that. Very, very heavy for a lot of people's liking. They were definitely a precursor to it, at least.
Oh, I don't think so.
Well, you were. In fairness, you were around. So I wasn't. I was literally nothing. Who else do I like on other sides of the spectrum? I also like, some experimental electronic people. Like ambient guys as well, like Boards of Canada. I love Radiohead. Obviously you know about Radiohead. And we have a couple of people coming on, Gerald. Just to finish answering your question.
Somebody I really like is this Asav Avidan. Have you heard him?
No.
You ought to hear him. It's very, very unique.
Link me some of that, and then yeah, we got a couple of people joining us, Gerald. So I'm just gonna say hello to them. We've got our good friend Chris Pavey. And we've got John Caro. Hey guys, thank you so much for coming on. I'm here with Gerald, the one and only. And so throw any questions Gerald's way and or my way. Gerald's been around the block.
Am I supposed to be able to see them or no?
No, it's a bit complicated, so I'm just going to take care of that. If that's cool.
Oh, okay.
So obviously you've spoken to Chris Pavey, Gerald. So guys, Gerald has, in his words, been around the block a few times or so. Would you say that's true, Gerald?
Yes, indeed.
In terms of music business?
I did my first gig when I was 13.
He did his first gig when he was 13.
First paid gig.
First paid gig. Gig for money. When he was 13. That was some time ago now, I think. And sorry. And so any questions, guys, you've got about the music business, music industry, Gerald is always happy to answer questions about publishing, copyright, like your property and your kind of rights and what to expect from people. Gerald knows a lot about the things and people to avoid. Would that be fair to say, Gerald?
Yes.
Yeah. So Gerald,
Avoid people with three noses.
avoid people with three noses. That's some high value advice right there. Love that. So yeah, right now Gerald is asking me about my musical taste, which is never actually happened before. And I'm flattered, Gerald. Even though we've spoken loads of times now. Anyway, so John asks, what are the main reasons why? I love this question. What are the main reasons why, Gerald, you're going to love answering this. What are the main reasons why songs now aren't as good as decades ago? Gerald?
Can they actually hear me talking?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Oh, okay, okay. I think it's a lot of things, but I think mostly because uh, um, there's not enough. There's not enough what I call breeding territory. You know, there's not enough places for people to play and with each other. Uh, Mostly, it's guys sitting on a couch practicing scales, or then they go into a studio somewhere and rehearse. And that is not how you become a good songwriter or a good musician. Although the two are not necessarily. You don't have to be a good musician to be a good songwriter. I mean, Bob Dylan's a perfect example of that. You
Yeah,
know, but I think it's just how the music industry has changed and evolved. It's um, young kids coming up now are more interested in building their brand than they are writing songs.
interesting. That's a really interesting point. Yeah, I mean, and do you think so? You think that's kind of contributed then to the? Do you think that musicians or songwriters now are not developing their craft as much as they should be? They're kind of too distracted by the other thing, even though the other things obviously are important to an extent. Do you think that they overvalue those relative to the actual process of building one's craft?
I think that they undervalue them. I think that I think that far too many musicians coming up now, and they're not worse musicians. You
Yeah.
know, they're just as good or better. The thing is, they're not developing their craft. Which is uh, being on stage or writing music or
Mm.
um, they're not spending as much time on things like that. There's not as much. I you know I One of the some of the things that I find like modern day musicians are not interested in is harmony.
Okay. So on a technical level.
Harmony is really way down the list for them, and it shouldn't be because it's such a big part of writing a good song.
Indeed. Indeed. And what else do you attribute it to then? Do you attribute it as well to what sort of cultural differences do you see now that you attribute this to as well?
Well, cultural differences in that the way people listen to music as well, and we've had this discussion before that um, people don't listen to albums, they don't listen to songs, they just listen to parts of songs.
Indeed. So you think the consumption, the way that we consume music has also contributed to that then?
Yeah, and I think what people do is just wind up uh, writing hooks instead of writing songs.
Sure.
You know,
Sure. That does make sense actually.
you know.
Fair enough. Yeah, that's but so how do we solve that? What's the solution to that? Where do people need to go? Who do they need to draw their influence from?
How do you solve that? That horse left the barn a long time ago.
Oh, okay.
Kids aren't gonna change. I mean, you try and give them good music, but if they don't want to hear it, they don't want to hear it. You know, I think I mean, call it an arrogant stance on my part, but I find that a lot of genres like hip hop and gangster rap and they started out with good intentions, but all they've done is watered down the field. You know.
Yeah, I mean, but that's just the business of music, isn't it? It's just
No, it's not. you know, it's infected other, it's infected the whole all genres of songwriting.
But what I mean is in terms of like the manufacturing process of music, like the
Well,
labels,
that's the problem, is
the
that
executives.
they're manufacturing
Yeah,
music. They're not, they're manufacturing a person that happens to be attached to a song.
yeah,
You
yeah. No,
know,
that's a good point.
a lot of kids don't identify with you know, a artist or a group and a string of songs. You know, they don't see that. They just see, you know, some hooks that are attached to these people. You
Mm,
know.
mm. Okay, cool, fair enough. Chris Pavey asks, what do you think are common mistakes new artists tend to make when they start out in this industry? Brackets, publishing slash label deals, etc.
Well, I mean, the big mistake that a lot of people think that there's a record company out there for them.
Okay.
You know, there is no more record companies. That doesn't exist anymore. You have to change your whole approach uh, to to the way uh, you have to look at it from a different point of view. You're not going to make any money selling records, you know, and you might want. I think the best thing for young people to do would be to carve out a niche in publishing. You know, if you're going to make any money anywhere, or else, you know, pay attention to the uh, uh, touring side of things, where there is still money to be made. You know,
Okay. Could you elaborate on the carve out a niche in publishing piece,
well,
please?
you know, you want to get a quiver of arrows. You know, a few songs that
Okay.
uh, you think might be good for television or movies or
Right.
commercials, and you approach a publishing company with them, and you see if they're interested, see if
You
they're
pitch,
interested in
yeah.
marketing. You know, I mean,
Okay.
it's just like anything else. You're just selling your wares.
Yeah, yeah. You're pitching your product.
You know, and I've had conversations with a few people, and I say, you know, don't if you're writing for publishing, don't write like just one kind of music. You know, try and get a wide spectrum of stuff, so that puts more interest in a publishing company. They can look at it and say, okay, look, he did this acoustic thing here that would be good. It's very moody, it would be good for television. He
Hmm.
did this, which is, you know, very cinematic. I think, you know, that, you know, you want to have something that could fit into more niches than not. You know,
Okay. Okay.
I mean, you know, you don't want to write in the aims in that kind of way, because it almost seems a bit mercenary. But
Yeah.
it's the way, it's just one other way to make a living nowadays. You know, and
Okay.
publishing is a, you know, there's no black and white in publishing. It's 50-50. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Fair enough. And in terms of like, okay, cool. So I pitch some songs to a publishing company, and what happens? Let's say they're interested. What happens? What does it mean when they're interested? What happens next? What can I expect?
well, then you
What
cut a deal with them.
you
You know,
can't do?
you
Okay.
cut a deal, sign a contract, and they do all the legwork for you. That's their job, is the legwork.
The
So
marketing of it.
yeah, most publishing companies have, you know, contacts with producers and, you know, Hollywood people and film industry. And so, you know, what happens is a lot of these producers put out bids. They say, hey, look, we're doing this show. We need this kind of moody music.
Cool.
So they'll go to 4 or 5 or 6, 7 publishing companies, and they'll have a listen, you know. And I think it's important to have a feel in the song for this kind of things, because that's what a producer will say to a publishing company. I'm looking for this kind of feel,
Okay.
you know.
Cool. Cool. And now we're kind of on the topic. I mean, if you were coming up now, or if you were mentoring, you know, a young budding musician now, And they wanted to know, or they wanted to anticipate, what are the sort of main income streams that they could pursue as far as you're concerned as songwriters. What would they be, including obviously publishing?
Well, that's pretty much it. You know, publishing and well, you know, if you can get a following, you could sell merchandise. You know,
Build a brand.
you know, try to make it a complete circle. You know.
And in terms of record labels, so going on to the other side now of records, is your advice, is your stance on this absolute? Like, is it avoid them at all costs, or is it more of a don't say no to a bad deal, don't say no to a good deal, and don't say no to a,
Well,
you know what I mean? Good deal.
I mean, there are some decent record companies out there. I'm not saying that they're all evil, you know, but they don't have your interest in mind.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they have their interest in mind, and you know, unless you're already fairly established, I don't see what a record company can do for you. You know, there's where is the revenues for them? Where is the money that, you know, a lot of record companies don't do the things that they used to do, which is artist development. They won't pay for your recordings anymore.
Okay.
You know, they won't try to get you out on the road and try and tighten you up. They're not interested in that kind of thing. They're interested in one thing and one thing only. One hit, and that's it.
Why aren't they interested in those things anymore?
Because it doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
You know. I mean, record companies have morphed into streaming companies. That's what they are now.
Yeah. Okay.
And that it's even better for them because now they can steal even more money, you know. So, in fact, they don't have to pay you at all. They'll give you, you know, 10 cents on 1,000 streams. I mean,
yeah.
Good luck with that.
Yeah, to quote you in one of our previous video, a band of thieves, no?
Yeah.
Is that generally your stance on them?
Well, pretty much my stance and every other musician in the business.
And in terms of artist development, so, you know, because most songwriters that I've met, Gerald, are excellent. You know, when they're an excellent songwriter, it doesn't mean they're very good at anything else, like in terms of developing or branding or all of that stuff. Where do they go now? Where it used to be they get signed and all of that is taken care of, you know, where do they go for that stuff now? The missing pieces, you know, that used to be the record company.
Publishing.
Okay.
That's you know, that's pretty much it. I mean, a lot of good songwriters who do that kind of stuff for a living, write songs for movie houses. They don't even own their own stuff because the copyright laws have been written separately for the movie industry. They are allowed to buy music. Like they can have you on staff as a songwriter.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, sometimes they'll give you some points on the song, sometimes not. If you don't have a name, you know, you're just a plumber making a salary. You know?
So points, to anyone who's watching is new to that term, that's percentage points on royalties, isn't it right, Gerald?
Yeah, right.
Cool.
But you know, they don't have to do that because you don't own any of that.
Yeah,
they own it. Yeah, you know.
It's in the art of the deal, I suppose. If you have that leverage, you might be able to get it, but why would you? So it's unlikely.
Yeah, you know, I mean, listen, it's always been about leverage for record companies. Always. I mean, in the days when a CD sold for $20, you know, you as an artist, you would have to be the Rolling Stones to get 20 cents. So
fair enough. Okay, so John asks, what genres do you think have the best songwriters now?
You know, I think you know, it's like it's a loose term, but if I had to say, I like bands like Portugal the Man.
Okay.
I like this guy that I was just talking to you about, Asaf Avidan, the
Okay.
Israeli guy. I mean, I really like what they're doing. You know, they're really pushing the box, and you don't see a lot of musicians doing that. I like Massive Attack because, you know,
Yeah.
it's like you can't. The reason I can't put a genre on it because you can't. I mean, what is it?
Maybe that's why
Alternative
they're so good. You know.
alternative listening. You know, adult alternative listening. You
Yeah.
know, I mean, that's the way I like to brand my stuff as adult. You know, alternative listening because it scares the kids away.
Yeah. Sure. Sure.
You know, it's like putting a scarecrow in the garden. You know, so.
Love it. Love it. Cool. Chris Pavey asks, do you have any industry horror stories / anecdotes? Well, that's half an hour's of content right there, isn't it, Gerald?
Yeah, I have a short little story I'll tell. I'm
Let's
not going to
go.
give any names though, because I don't
No,
talk
no,
out of
no.
school.
No, of course, of course, of course, of course.
So I was in Switzerland with a band that was just starting to get um, some prowess. They were, you know, their first album had been out, and we were in Switzerland laying down some tracks, and they, you know, they still didn't have enough pull at the record company, and so we spent about 12 or 13 days recording, and the bass player was having an affair with the girl who was the hostess of this recording studio.
Oh,
And the leader of the group just was out of his mind. Uh, and I understand why. You know, it was not very smart.
mm-hmm.
And it got to be fairly obvious. So anyway, we finished recording, and a couple of months later, the guy called me and said, you know, look, the record company dropped us. They're not, I mean, not dropped them, but said that they weren't interested. They weren't going to, you know, they had picked the 10 people that year that they were going to make a big move on. And um, uh, he was really angry, asked me what to do about it. And I said, you know, one thing you could do is you could get the tapes back. You know, you could ask them if you can buy your masters back from
Yeah.
them. And I did say to him, you know, they're probably not going to sell them to you. And I'm a little clear on how this evolved, but at any rate, the bass player called the girl who was the hostess, and they sent him about 10 2-inch reel-to-reels, and one at a time, she took out the recorded music, put the blank tape inside the
No.
box, and eventually got all the tapes, and he flew to Switzerland and got it. And then, you know, I think I was part of this. I can't remember. I think I had said that they should try something like this. Anyway, I'm feeling guilty now. I'm feeling guilty now. So then he called the record company and said, look, you know, I'm interested. Would you be interested in selling us the masters? And he said, I might be. Let me get back to you. So he called him a couple of weeks later and he said, look, I'm really sorry. Somehow all your tapes got demagnetized. And you know, we're gonna let you go. We're gonna cancel your commitment to us and cancel the contract. So
Oh my God.
so they got their tapes. They did some re-recording on it, and you know, it's it's not like the digital days now where you could tell if that was,
Yeah.
you could trace it back. So they were fine. So
Amazing.
I don't know if that's a horror story, but
oh God, that is a good story though, man.
I told him later. I said, "You see, you were so angry at him. You were shouting at him for 2 weeks, and you should be thanking him."
Yeah.
But I mean, I do have a lot of horror stories, but it's not good to talk out of school. And I mean, I don't play that much anymore anyway, so it probably wouldn't hurt my reputation at all. But I've sent you some of the stories I've written.
So. Oh yeah, they're great. They're great. Well, it's not like you're saying names or anything. Chris says, "Brilliant, thanks for sharing that." Oh my God, I love because this romance around it in the sense that because it's stuff that couldn't really happen now because of digital and stuff.
Yeah, it would be hard it's impossible. I mean, how But
fair enough.
Record companies were like that in those days. I mean, they were just a gang of thieves. I mean,
yeah.
If you ever saw Tony Mottola, who was the head of Sony Records, if you ever saw him on the street, you didn't really know that he worked for Sony Records, the first thing that would come to your mind is he was a gangster.
Mafia.
I mean, he behaves just like it.
Really?
Well, oh yeah, he has a terrible reputation. Terrible. He ran Sony Records. I mean, he some brilliant acts, Daryl Hall and John Oates, and he had all those great acts, but he was a taskmaster. So.
Fair enough. Another question here. Well, a question here from Simone. What would be
Mr. Simone?
Mr. Simone, indeed, our good friend. What would be the best route for two musicians who wish to collaborate in the production of library music as a potential side income? Would it need to be a formal partnership, brackets business-wise, or no? I assume when he says formal partnership, maybe would they have to set up a limited company and stuff like that?
Well,
an LLC or whatever.
You don't have to.
Okay.
When a song is written, when you and another person sit down and write a song, that's it.
That's joint ownership, isn't it?
That's joint ownership. That's the end of the story.
As far as copyright is concerned, that's it.
I mean, to protect yourselves, I mean, it's like the old days. Record companies would never allow you to submit music to them or your music to them without having a lawyer. It has to always be done through a lawyer. I mean, so, you just want to protect yourself all the time. I mean, what are copyright laws anymore anyway? Aside from the television industry and the movie industry, very few people pay attention to it anyway. Streaming companies don't seem to care. You saw that bill that they just had passed, so
Yeah, what do you think to that?
Well, it's just absurd. But who lobbied? It's so political. Who lobbied Washington for that? Who else? The streaming companies.
Yeah.
Those laws were there to protect the artists. So, and now they have someone like President Trump who doesn't really care about those things, and he says, "Oh, yeah, of course he's going to take the side of big business." So
yeah. Well, he is big business, so there you go.
So it's another uphill climb for artists.
Yeah.
But as far as Simone, limited liability company is easy to do. You can do it by yourself. You don't need a lawyer to do that.
Yeah.
And make sure you send your stuff in to get copyright. It doesn't. I mean, look. If someone publishing house takes your stuff, they won't take it unless you have paperwork showing them that it's all copyright. It's not. You can't just be handing your music off to people and think everybody's going to be doing the best, what's in your best interest.
Yeah, the due diligence for you.
Yeah.
The admin, that stuff. Fair enough. Simone also goes on to ask, Yeah, it's more about the division of tasks. Maybe one or two would write more than the other, but the other could work more in the production, technicality and stuff. I mean, that kind of bridges the gap, though, doesn't it, Gerald? Between
That's something that they have to decide amongst themselves.
yeah, so that's
those are
just
things you write into the rules of your limited liability company.
yeah, so that's kind of something that you just sort out amongst yourselves. Good communication and good, in terms of like the actual property, there's a grey area there's kind of a drawing a grey area there between the the masters and the actual song, I suppose, isn't it? If someone's taking more care of production.
Yeah, well, I mean, that again, you have to decide who's the producer.
Yeah, so you have to decide that and put it in writing, basically.
I think that if you're going to have a partnership with another songwriter, you should make it as clear as you can with each other, like, or have something like a buy sell trade agreement or something like that. Like
Okay.
Steely Dan is having this very problem right now.
Okay.
The guy who died, his wife is saying that she's entitled to all of his copyrights, all the publishing, future live shows.
Right.
I mean, she has no right to that stuff.
Yeah.
But there's a perfect example of where things can go south with this. And look, I mean, writing relationships are like any kind of relationship. You can wind up not wanting to work with each other. So you have to also decide what you're going to do if you split.
Of course.
Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, that makes sense. I didn't think that far ahead. Cool. Well, Simone says cool, thanks. So thank you for sharing that information. There's a lot to think about there. I mean, for me, for me, like the whole thing is communication and expectations. It's just making sure that you have solid line of like that you work with people that you trust and that communication is down and everything that's in writing is in writing, isn't it? But
well, listen, musicians have notoriously been bad business people.
yeah.
I mean, there's a million stories out there about people who wrote songs. They were musicians and got taken to the cleaners by these nefarious people. I mean, if you don't protect yourself, you can't complain in the end when people do this to you.
Yeah, that's a good point. If you don't protect yourself, you can't complain when someone takes advantage. Yeah. I mean, so what you just said about musicians and business people and stuff like that, and I was kind of alluding to that earlier in terms of like what gaps musicians have in their, or some musicians may have in their skills to, completely facilitate their career as a musician. In terms of a musician starting out, a songwriter starting out, who do they need to get on board, do you think, to fill in those gaps? Like managers, whatever, sort of...
Well, it depends how far along you are. I mean,
Okay.
If you're two guys just sitting around on the couch, you don't have anything yet. I mean, you have to have something before you can go to a manager. You've got to have some sort of brand or a show, some music, something to put together. I mean, that's where you have to start. That's where the incubation starts there.
Yeah, fair enough. So build something and then bring some people in, because obviously a manager is going to want to know what they're investing in, their time.
Yeah. I mean, I have a lot of people come to me and say, you've got some connections. Can you hook me up with a manager? I said, what have you got to sell?
Yeah, you multiply 1 million by 0, you get 0, right?
Well, what's he going to manage? Nothing.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a day, there was a time when record companies would take young artists, young budding people, and, you know, put them on stage, put them on the road for a year, you know, but nobody does that anymore. You know, you have to have a finished product when you go to a management company now, or a touring company, you know, not some idea, or, you know.
Yeah. It's the same in business in general, you know. It's like going to, you know, trying to get, you know,
going to a bank to get a loan from them, and the manager says, "Well, what's your collateral? What's your business plan?"
what you
Well,
got.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I just need some money. You know, that's not the way it works.
Indeed. So Chris Pavey asks, he says, you guys might agree with me. Do you feel it's hurting engineers / producers, etc., that credits aren't readily available on digital platforms? Whereas physical media mostly had a place where credits could be printed. So I'm gonna make my stance on this. Obviously, you know, I mean, why shouldn't they have credits, you know, publicly available, just like they did with CDs? You know,
when you say credits, what do you mean by credits? Do you mean
the name on, like, if you go to Spot? I mean, this is my interpretation.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, so I agree. I agree with you wholeheartedly.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know why anyone would disagree about that.
Yeah.
Unless it's obviously like a ghost production thing, but that's obviously what that's supposed to be. And
well, I know somebody who would argue with you.
Yeah.
Yeah, Spotify.
Well, Tidal did it before. They've implemented it. From memory, it might have been Tidal. Simone goes, yeah, totally agree with you, Chris Pavey. Spotify recently added metadata for crediting producers, but not engineers. Still a long way. Yeah, but the thing is, the distributors still have to implement it on their side as well. Actually, that brings me to a question I was going to ask you. Chris says, yeah, it's a small step forward. Hopefully we'll get full credit soon. I feel artwork has suffered as well. That little tiny image at the bottom always sucks. Yeah, I agree with that.
You got that right.
Okay, and Sean Walsh at Lonely Scene Productions asks, and I've got a question for you in a minute. Are music library a viable source of income / when making CDs for music libraries, how many tracks are customary and are stemmed out tracks considered separate tracks on said CDs? Should we read that out again?
Yeah, read it again.
Yeah. Are music libraries a viable source of income / when making CDs for music libraries, how many tracks are customary and are stemmed out tracks considered separate tracks on said CDs? I'm not entirely sure about the question.
Well,
personally,
I'm not exactly sure. I mean, look, I wouldn't call it a really secure source of a monetary income.
Okay.
I haven't done much in that, and I you know, I used to do a lot of karaoke stuff, but music libraries like FX and stuff like that, I'm a little that's not my strength. So
okay, cool. Sean, if you could post that into the Antiquity songwriters group at some point now or in the future, that would be great, just so that we can maybe dive into that, see if anyone else there has an answer to that question, and take it from there. John says, in the credits matter, last year a free plugin called RinM was released to help musicians and engineers to have a better way to make the credits through the entire production process. Have you tried it? I haven't tried it, but I have heard about it.
Yeah, I use Kid 3 right from the beginning when I put everything, as much as metadata as I can into it, you know.
Kid
Engineers 3. Kid 3, yeah, it's really quite, it's pretty good, you know. And also, what was the other thing that you remember there was one I was talking to you about before? I can't remember the name of it. Oh yeah, Music Brains.
Music Brains.
Picard, Music Brains. That's a good place to make sure that, because it's like an open source library like Wikipedia, and you can go on there and you can check stuff that you've worked on as an engineer or mastering or whatever, and to make sure that all your metadata is included in there, and you can add it yourself.
You can also email all music, can't you, about those things?
Yeah, but I think Picard and Music Brain they're getting to be kind of the industry standard now, because it's open source. You know what I'm saying? So you can go to an actual, it shows you the album, and on that album it shows everybody who worked on it, and you can, if your name is missing there or misspelled, you can go in and correct it, and a lot of the industry uses their stuff that's embedded, like Spotify and all. If they're not quite sure about the metadata, and they'll go there and pull it out of there.
Cool.
Yeah,
cool. Phil Jones goes on to kind of respond to Sean's question, says most libraries take stuff digitally now and usually want tracks with and without vocals, or broken down into cues / stems, I suppose. Yeah, okay. I don't know. Haven't had much visibility on the submission process to libraries, but it kind of makes sense that they would want stems. Obviously, yeah. I mean, for anyone watching, that wasn't the bit that I was confused about. But for anyone watching, I mean, the problem is with the words tracks and stems, they're used interchangeably these days.
Yeah.
A stem is a bounced group of tracks, like drums or vocal bus or something like that. Tracks, obviously, keys, vocal, backing vocal, whatever, all the tracks. But I also understand that, people use the word stems in place of tracks these days. And obviously, widely, we use the term tracks to mean songs sometimes. Quite confusing. Anyway, so Lonely Sea Productions also says, awesome, Phil, thank you. So would separate versions of the same song be considered separate tracks?
Separate versions of the same song?
Yeah, so one with vocals and one without. Most of the time it's treated as a separate track. Okay. I think we should continue this conversation on the Facebook group. Phil seems to know a bit about this library submission process, which is cool. Great. Gerald, I wanted to ask you, following on from what we were talking about before in terms of publishing, because obviously your stance is generally you don't need a record label. How do you feel? Obviously, you've got experience with CD Baby and stuff like that. How do you generally feel about the online distributors right now? And just to clear that up for anyone who's watching, an online distributor is somewhere where you go as an artist and you upload your master or your masters, and they push them out for a fee, generally, to Spotify, iTunes, Amazon, Google Play, all the big guys and gals in music streaming and music selling platforms. Gerald, what's your stance?
Well, I think that's the best route to take nowadays. The thing is, you're going to have to be your own carnival barker, though.
Yeah, you're gonna have to be your own everything, your own record label, basically.
But I mean, I like Bandcamp.
Okay.
There's a few others that I like, and I like it because the breadth and width of stuff that you can put out there. They're letting people buy lossless. They're letting you put videos up. They're really letting you design the way you want to be promoted. Yeah,
the way you sell your music, basically.
Yeah, and Spotify and Pandora and those other people, they don't. They're not. Their software is really horrible. It barely works, and you get stuck in with other people, so that it's not like your own separate page, So
yeah.
But I think, listen, if you've got some get up and go, I think that's really the way to go. you know, and you know, Bandcamp also lets you sell merchandise from it too. And you
Yeah,
know,
you can even sell cassette.
yeah, yeah, you know, I mean,
The ultimate hipster platform.
you know, there's somebody in Outer Mongolia who's still using cassette, you know.
Yeah,
So
fair enough.
yeah, you, you know, I think that, you know, why not take the bull by the horns and be your own boss, you know, like, you know, I mean, if you sell your soul to a record company, they're going to tell you what kind of music they want you to play. They're going to be big brother. They're going to watch over you, and they're not going to let you be your own creative self. You know, this way you're your own self, you know. You don't have to worry about whether this song fits into the genre of what they expect, or
Yeah,
fits into the genre of being able to be sold on the radio, or if it's 4 minutes or it's 2 minutes. It doesn't, who cares anymore, you
yeah.
know.
I'm just going to make a point on this issue. So a lot of people are going to be thinking, oh, okay, so, you know, they might watch this stream, Gerald, and might think, oh, so do I go on Spotify or do I go on Bandcamp? And let me put my position on this. If you want to sell your music, you know, as difficult as that might be these days, if you want to sell your music, you know, that might be lossless downloads, that might be cassettes, that might be CD or whatever, and plus merchandise. Now, obviously, you could use things like Bandcamp to do that, and Bandcamp is great. However, I would still have something on Spotify.
I knew you were going to say that.
No, just because of the reality of the attention of the consumer and where they are. You know, in terms of access to, you know, it depends on your goals. Obviously, if you don't care that you sell more than 10 CDs, then you don't have to do this. But if you really want to get people to listen to your music, you know, you want a lot of people to listen to your music, I would seriously consider putting the music on, some of your music on Spotify, maybe a couple of singles, right? Have the full album on Bandcamp or wherever you want to sell it, and get those singles onto playlists. I've said that before and I'll say it again. Cheers, John. Catch you in a bit. Thanks for being on here.
Thanks,
today.
John.
Lonely Sea Productions asks, can you talk a little about music publisher writing rights versus copyright? When he says writing rights versus copyright, what I think he means are publishing rights versus record rights. I could be wrong about that, like masters versus songs. If one person owns the writing and publishing, but another person owns the copyright, maybe to the record, I think he means there, who is allowed to sell a recording?
Well, it doesn't work like that.
Okay.
I'll put it in a nutshell for this person. It's split into two 1 to 100% copyright towers. Let's say that, okay?
Yeah, 2 times 100%.
So the one on the left is publishing. And how that's split up is 50-50. You wrote the song, you go into a contract with them, and you split whatever you get 50-50. There's no gray area there. Now, the thing about writing a song and collecting mechanicals on the song, that is done by companies like BMI and ASCAP, who monitor things like radio, television. They give lists to these companies and they say, this is how many times we played it.
Okay.
Now, so there's royalties paid out. Now, also, the artists who played on there also get points on that. But those are things that are developed through contracts, and all those little fine details are different on that side of it. You know, those are things that are negotiated.
Yeah.
The other thing isn't negotiated. It's 50-50. And that's, in a nutshell, that's how it's done. You know, cool. People get those two things mixed up all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. It's important to make that distinction. So, yeah. Thanks for clearing that up, Gerald. Chris Pavey says, cassettes exclamation mark, exclamation mark, exclamation mark, exclamation mark, exclamation mark. You know, which is what to be expected of Chris Pavey as a analog enthusiast mastering engineer. Unless you prefer not to, yeah. If that's fair to say, Chris. Simone says, I tend to agree with you on this. I spoke with Gerald once before and expressed this kind of idea about having something on Spotify, but try to funnel to the full thing on Bandcamp. Yeah, I mean,
well, you know what? Do you know what Spotify is? Spotify was the subway system in New York in the 70s.
Spotify
now,
was
if you
the
had
subway
to get
system in New York in the 70s.
You had to get from Brooklyn to Manhattan, but you had to get on this train that was full of muggers, rapists, murderers, junkies, you know, and thieves. But you had no choice, because if you wanted to get home, you had to get on that train. So that's the way I see Spotify and Pandora and all these other. They're just a waste of time. You know, for the small guy, it's difficult for them to get their stuff on there. You know, it's
the thing is though, you know,
the thing is they're a necessary evil, but
yeah,
see,
they are a necessary evil.
They're not. I think Spotify in the long run is not going to exist.
Yeah, sure, but the mechanics of it are that you get on the right playlist, and a career can be made overnight.
It's almost impossible getting on those playlists.
Yeah, I know, but I know that it's really difficult, especially with the supply is ridiculous of music now. You know, a lot of tastemakers, they don't want to hear it. They're like, we're done with this, you know. But the reality is, Spotify playlists are today's radio stations.
Well, but do you know how you get on those Spotify playlists? You have to pay them.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, that's what it gets down to. That's how they're making their money, you know.
Yeah, of course, man, of course, absolutely. Chris says, just nostalgia. Cool, man, I know. Love it. Phil says, sales of cassettes went up by 35% in 2017, probably due to things like Guardians of the Galaxy, etc. Yeah, maybe.
Cassettes went up
35% in 2017.
The problem is nobody has cassette players anymore.
Yeah, I always revert back to that when I went to a friend's house recently. Probably shouldn't drop his name on this, just in case it gets traced back to the band. But like, I went to his house. I was like, yo, how's it going? And he had this CD on his desk, wrapped in cellophane, Gerald. A CD case wrapped in cellophane with artwork and everything. And this was like 6 months ago, Gerald. And I was like, oh, look at that. You know, that's cool.
I know where you're going to go with this.
Whose is this? And he goes, oh, it's my mate's band. You know, he gave me a CD and everything. I was like, oh, awesome, man. Let's listen to it. He goes, I don't have a CD player. I was like, I know you don't have a CD player. And there he is. Simone has one cassette deck. He says, I have one cassette deck, ! Chris Pavey says, could it be that Spotify is just a digital version of the music industry? You have to fight to get the gig at the best venue you could. Now it's getting to the right playlist. Yeah, I agree with that generally.
Oh, absolutely. That's the exact same thing.
That's basically it. Yeah. Simone says, checked on eBay, brackets cassettes. They were being sold at ridiculously high prices. Lol. And Aleki says, our good friend Aleki as well. Good point, Chris Pavey. The big five are now the streaming platforms.
Are the what?
Streaming platforms.
Yeah.
Streaming platforms are the new big companies, the new big record companies, basically.
Oh, they all started off as record companies. A lot of those people who work in those places are all ex-record company people, you know. I mean, look, from a business standpoint, you know, you've eliminated everything you had to pay or do for the musician before, and you're making even more money on his music. You know?
Yeah, yeah. Aleki goes on to say it's the natural evolution. Yeah, makes sense. Okay. Any last questions, guys, before Gerald and I call it a night? It's been a good hour now, and I think it's been a good stream. Have you enjoyed yourself, Gerald?
I have indeed.
Amazing. All right, so I'll just let any last questions come through. Any more questions after the stream, or if you're watching this stream retrospectively, you can please feel free to post your questions in the Antiquity Songwriters Facebook group. So just go to the Facebook and, you know, find the Antiquity Songwriters Facebook group and post your questions in there, and Gerald will happily get back to you. Oh, Chris asked a really good question. He says, what would you both like to see happen in the next 5 years in this industry? Go, Gerald.
Oh,
It's a big one.
I'd like to see some. I would like to see uh, two things. I'd like to see more venues open up for musicians. I think that they're what clubs are venues where there's a different act every night, but a 2 to 3 or 4 thousand seat venue. I think that is disappeared too much, and that would go a long ways to um, uh, uh, a long ways to creating breeding grounds for musicians. Especially and not just the people who are starting out, but people who are just a little bit above that level. You know,
Yeah.
and I'd like to see the dust settle in the recording industry. I think that streaming companies. I'd really like to see that shit gone. I know I'd like to see it evolve into something reasonable. Where a musician can make somewhat of a living off of that. Why are you cutting the musician out of all that? They're just filling their own pockets. There's got to be something in there. There's going to be a group of people that come up with something, probably started by musicians.
Okay.
That it's going to make it a lot easier for people to get their music out there.
Okay, let me give you my answer to this question. What I would like to see in the next 5 years in the music industry, and what I'm actually really, really excited to see in the next 5, 10, 15 years in the music industry, amongst many other industries, is the disruption of the infrastructure and the middlemen by blockchain technology. Blockchain technology is going to disrupt every middleman in the whole macroeconomic situation of the music industry. It's very difficult to see how that's going to materialize at the moment, but it's going to do it to everything, and it's going to do it to streaming. There will literally be a trustless system, and people will get paid.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah. So no, it won't be up to Spotify who gets paid what. It'll be it won't be a perfect system. It's going to take us a long time to get there. But blockchain, I assure you, people, will disrupt all of the middlemen. And
what is blockchain? Tell me, I'm not.
So blockchain is basically like in its current applications at the moment, in terms of like currency and stuff like that, is basically a means of storing and transferring value, but in a way that is completely decentralized. So if I'm to send you something of value, I have to go through middlemen, like let's say money as an arbitrary example of something of value. I have to go through middlemen, and middlemen take the fee, right? But in these, and those middlemen are big companies, and it's all of their rules, and it's all or nothing. At the moment, however, with blockchain, that entire process is decentralized via the platform, and in some case, that's like literally people with computer miners all contributing to that. But basically the political issues of it, as well as the technical process of it happening is decentralized. But at its core, the blockchain is basically just a distributed ledger of transactions. And it's difficult to dive much deeper into it now. But just
that's a big mountain to climb. Those middlemen are going to not want to lose that venue.
Yeah, the government won't want. You know, it will happen to everyone else, but the government will fight against it for as long as they physically can. But it's already working in nearly everything. I mean, there's industries being completely disrupted as we speak about it, and it's going to change everything. It's the new internet. So there you go. Yeah, that's my stance on it. But I don't want to, I could talk probably for an hour about it, and that would be barely scratching the surface. Anyway, thank you for everyone who's turned up. Thank you so much, Gerald, for taking the time.
My pleasure once again.
And we'll be doing this hopefully on a regular basis, maybe again this time next week. If that works for you, Gerald. Just throw it at you. But I'll create an event in the Antiquity Songwriters group. And guys, if you're not in the group already, please come into the group. If you want a place to discuss these things on an ongoing basis. And that's where you can get the event invites and stuff like that, where we post a link out and stuff. So thanks again, everyone. Thanks, Gerald. And we'll all see you next time.